Greetings, friends. I'm the Preacher 711, and I'm here today to talk to you about one of my favourite bits of the Blake 7 expanded universe. It is, of course, Vindictus. But more specifically, we're not talking again about the book. We're talking about the audio, because it's almost here. Or maybe when you've heard this, it is here. But whatever way, I'm thrilled to be talking about it. And I've got three of the powerhouse players behind the Vindictus audio on the podcast with me. So we're going to go one by one and do some little intros. If you just want to introduce yourself and say what part you play in the Vindictus machine. Neil, do you want to jump in first?
Hi, I'm Neil Shearer. I'm co-writer of the novel Vindictus, and I play in the audio, the part of Zach Enso.
Brilliant. Louella, do you want to say hi?
Hi, I'm Louella Richardson, and I'm one of the co-authors of Vindictus. And that's kind of it. I'm not playing any roles in the first part, so I've had it easier than Chrisi and Neil have.
And I like that. Not in the first part. Is that a little tease? Does that mean maybe in part two?
No, we're not.
Brilliant. And Chrisi, welcome.
Thank you. My name's Chrisi Pashley, and I put myself out there to make or to help make the audio of this cool book. I think it's going to be a really great thing.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys, for all taking the time. We've gone truly international with this podcast session. We're all scattered across the globe. So, yeah, this is great. So I'm going to start with, where did the idea of turning the Vindictus novel into an audio come from? Who started it? What was the genesis? Who kicked this one off?
I'm not really 100% sure, to be honest. I think Louella and I always had a kind of dream that somehow it would become alive, so to speak. And then we kind of just started chatting with Chrisi about it, and it kind of grew. Anyone else got any other thoughts?
I would say it's more Neil's fault. Well, it really started with Neil getting in touch with me and saying, oh, there's somebody who wants to do an audio version of Role Reversal, which is the story we had in the Cult Edge anthology. So I was like, okay, that's cool. And then I was like, and I think I initially thought it was just going to be a straight narration through it. And then I was like, oh, we're thinking of having actors play parts in it. It's like, okay, that's cool. And then Neil was like, I'm going to play Blake. I thought that'll be awesome. And then it's like, do you want to play Jenna? It's like, no, I don't. But I got talked into it. So, and then after that, it was going on like, what do you think about maybe doing an actual audio Vindictus? So I was like, yeah, I mean, the role reversal thing came out great. So yeah, I thought that was very cool.
Why did I completely forget role reversal and the audio? Oh dear.
Time, age, pressure, Neil. Pick one.
All of the above.
Yeah, absolutely. And Chrisi, how did you come into this gang? Crazy gang.
Oh well, I've been dabbling around with audio since about 2021, and I made all the stories in the Forever Avon anthology, and then I kind of went, right, what's next? And I got in touch with Graham at Cult Edge and said, can I make some of these stories out of your annual that's coming? And he kindly said, sure, but it's up to the authors, so get in touch with them, and if they say yes, no worries. So that's how that came about. And then from there, it went to Scorpio Tales after that. And I think I spoke to Neil on one of the Facebook sites about the stories, and he mentioned that he had a story in the new book that's coming, that was coming. And we just got on to making. I said, oh well, do you want your story made? Because that's what I said to everyone at the time. I don't say it anymore because I've got too much to do. But and you know, he was obviously for it. And I think I spoke to Louella later. Yeah, kind of got in touch with Louella after. And I do distinctly recall making a very auspicious statement to Neil one day, saying, "Oh well, you know, how about I make Vindictus? Would you let me make Vindictus? You know, like this." And I remember distinctly as well what he said. He said, "Well, that would be a very big undertaking." Well, that's, you know, like the most underestimated statement of the entire thing, really, isn't it? But I didn't listen, like I never listen, and here we are. I don't regret it.
So there we are.
At all.
Officially, it's Chrissy's doing.
I think that's where we're getting to. I think that's where we've reached. Yeah.
Well,
definitely.
all right, yeah, it's a fair cop. No, well, okay, I don't know what I'm saying. It's like late in the day, and I'm really quite delirious. So what can I say?
No,
You got me.
Thinking back now, that is what happened, and then the feelers started going out for filling our rather large cast.
Yes, and we'll get on to that in a second. But what I need to ask first is, because poor Chris has never been in my podcast crosshairs before, I've got to ask my favourite question, Chrissy, which is, how did Blake 7 come into your life?
I am English originally, and when I was a kid, I was 10 in 1978. So Blake 7 was it. Blake 7 was the new thing, and in my household, you know, Star Wars was also the thing. So there was all that Saskin Hatch and Dukes of Hazzard, all these things. They're all happening at the same time, and Doctor Who, of course. So Blake 7 was just something we all watched, and as soon as I saw it, that was it. I don't know. I just have, ever since I saw that first episode, and I was 10 watching the way back. I mean, this is probably tells you a lot about people of our generation who were exposed to such things at that age. But I just loved it, the darkness of it, and the depth of the stories, and how I didn't really understand it at first, but I just really loved the characters and the interplay, and just the fact that it was a bit dark and not so happy and go lucky as the rest of it.
Absolutely,
if that makes sense.
It does totally,
Yeah.
totally. So Neil, you opened the door kindly, mate, into casting. How did you go about assembling this legion of actors that you required?
It was nothing more complicated than just asks on social media. We've got a Facebook group for the Vindictus novel with about 350 odd people in there, and it was just an ask in there. Okay, guys, we're looking to do this. Does anyone want to throw their hat in the ring and get involved? Experience preferred, not entirely necessary. And it grew from there, really. And the quality of some of the people that we've had has just been phenomenal, I think is fair to say. And you know, we've got some people with a bit of experience, and we've got some people with limited, and we got some people with zilch. So it's been really, really good, and really surprising how good it's all kind of come together, and the quality of what we've had put in by the actors, and how much they've really invested in it, and it has been really, really kind of humbling.
And what have you learned from working together? What's the most memorable bit of doing this process for you? What's really sticks out in your mind about the pains, the pressures, the perils, all of that? Anybody that wants to jump in on this one about the whole thing?
Well, we all pronounce things real different. You get an Australian, a Southern American, and a guy from Wales, and the pronunciation of basic stuff has been interesting to work out.
And then
really?
all the cast as well, from wherever they're from around the world as well. And we've had a couple of Australians, we've had we got a Canadian in there. We've got a lot of English people in there. So yeah, there is that. There's definitely that. So much so that I had to record a pronunciation file.
Really?
Yeah, and I mean, Louella's responsible for most of that, and her writing of The Planet is a Death. So I mean, that's just, that's her fault.
Okay, in all fairness, at the time I was writing it, I didn't really think about people having to say it and pronounce it. So I'm a ancient civilization nerd, so I was just having fun, like, let's take this word and it's ancient Sumerian and we'll throw in some Klingon and some apostrophes for no apparent reason. And it just looked cool. And then, a year and a half later, I'm getting these messages from poor Neil while he's trying to put together a pronunciation guide. And it's just like, how the hell do you pronounce this? Like,
so what caused the most problems then with people's regional pronunciations of words? What ones stick out in your mind then for your little guide? What was?
There's numerous ones, to be fair. Well, I think the main one that had happened is one of the characters that we had always written and thought was pronounced as Samel, but it turns out that is not the right pronunciation, and it was Amanda who plays the part who actually, and I think Chrisi as well said so as well. That's not how you say that, guys, and it's Semele. So that was the biggest major when you got one of the main characters, and there's me and Louella pretending to know everything about this universe that we've created, not even knowing how one of the main characters is pronounced, to be honest.
So I bet that was fun, Chrisi, dropping that bombshell.
You always get that. People are literal readers, and I read Semele that way, and then I think someone said to me at some point, "That's not right," and I was like, "Oh, isn't it?" So it's just the way people read things, and they make their own mind up about it, and that's why I think I said to you, Neil, we need to tell people about this.
Exactly. So. And then Chrisi was responsible. You need to do a pronunciation file, Neil. Oh, for God's sake, do I? and I did.
So, and this is just the beginning.
And I did have to. And yeah, when you can go onto Google or whatever, and you can get pronunciations up, can't you? And it's an actual Greek name, isn't it? I think. And then the pronunciation thing actually told me, no, this is how you pronounce it. And Chrisi and Amanda were right. And
okay, in our defense, though, she's a mutoid. She's not Greek. So my rationale was that's the mutoid pronunciation.
We had to. I mean, nobody was pushing it. I think we just kind of had to compromise. There's been a lot of compromising, to be truthful, and I've been quite sort of, I don't know, I've been impressed by our two authors here about how they've kind of been willing to make allowance for the audio medium, because it's not the same at all as the written medium. And Neil and I had long conversations about that, because I think maybe he thought, oh my God, she's just messing with our story. And then I wouldn't blame you. Absolutely. I was messing with your story, but it's not from the point of view of anything other than it has to be written in a certain way for it to work in audio. And I don't believe in the end that we changed anything about the story at all. It just is written slightly differently, that's all. So
that's really kind
of digressed a bit there.
No, and I think back to your original point, you said what's the I can't remember your original question was what
have you learned? What's the biggest?
For me, that has been the biggest learning point. In all honesty, is that the difference between the two mediums, and it can be quite subtle, to be honest. But that's been the work that has to go into. To making sure that everything is prepared and ready in terms of scripts for the audio medium. So that's literally has been going through the book and not rewriting it. That's the wrong word. I can't think of a better word. Chrisi probably can, but going through it and changing it to fit the medium.
It was
line
just
by
most of it was
line
just
by line.
simplification. Yes, line by line. Most of it was just simplification, I think, and just when you're writing, I think you can say more, but when you're reading, you need to say less. So it was a question of just taking out a few words. But when Neil and Lou saw the edits that I'd done and they looked at it in review mode, it was like a bad school teacher's, markups on a terrible essay. Go back, do it again. F. Go on, off you go. So it must have looked terrible.
I mean, to be fair, I'm a teacher in real life, so I can't control that. But I haven't had to put anybody in timeout yet. Yeah.
I think the main difference is a lot of the exposition that you put into a novel for the written word. You're looking, I think, in the audio medium for it to collapse a little bit, and as far as you can for the characters to get the message across more than perhaps a whole load of narration.
Yeah,
there's a lot of narration, don't get me wrong, and rightly so, but where you can, you want the the narrator's a character as well, isn't it, really, in a way? But
yeah. I was actually going to ask you, because I love this, that we talk about sort of the differences between the two, and I was quite curious as you guys were saying it, how you were going to get away, because there's a lot of description. There's a lot of, this is planet such and such, this is Vindictus, this is so there's a narrator that's going to be doing that kind of heavy lifting.
That's exactly it. Yeah, I think, is that right, Chrisi?
Yeah, some stupid person we pulled in off the street.
Oh.
And then there have been parts during it where we've gone, okay, if we add a word here, if we add a bit here, if we take a bit out, then the characters in conversation or in a scene can explain, rather than within a novel there'd be text there explaining. So
Absolutely, but without bogging
you can
it
do
down
a
into
certain
exposition
amount
mode.
you can do a certain amount with sound, but in real full cast audio, because this isn't a real full cast audio, because there's lots and lots of narration, so it's between, and I'm not an expert, this is just the way I take it, it's halfway between an audio book and an audio drama, because there's part narration, part full cast for this. But in a real full cast, you wouldn't have any narration, and seriously, that was not going to work, I don't think, for this. I think that's not the way I make audios anyway. I like the explanation part of it, and it's an explanation rich book. There's a lot of things you've got to explain, because it's make believe, it's a make believe world, so you've got to explain it to a certain extent, and that's half the fun of it as well.
Yeah.
Some of it is some of the endearing pieces are the descriptions. So
Yeah.
and I think it's part of the major difference, isn't it, that if it was written for audio, it would be written very differently. It's because the starting point, it was written for reading as a novel, unraveling it from there, and written so much so to be for reading as a novel, with as exactly what Chrisi just described, loads and loads of set in the scene, loads and loads of set in the universe, description and all that. It would never, it could be rewritten for an audio, but that would take forever.
And I think I think we talked about this when we did a podcast before, guys, but I think one of the things I really admired about it, compared to apparently other continuation novels are available, so I've heard, but one of the things I really did respect about yours compared to some of the others is the fact that you take the time to inform the reader who may not be completely conversant with Blake 7. You do a great job of bringing them up to speed with, this has happened, this is where we are, this is what the Federation is, this is what they're doing, without bogging it down in exposition. Because I wondered which way, when I first read it, you were going to take this. Were you just going to skip, Gala Prime's done and here we go? Were you going to bog it down in exposition? But you actually managed to sort of toe this really nice middle ground where fresh readers could come to it. People with a cursory knowledge of Blake 7 could come to it. They could read the blurb on the back of the book and probably get up to speed. And I thought that was one of the great strengths of the novel, was it brought people up to speed, but it wasn't laboured.
Well, and what's funny is being American, most of my friends really aren't familiar with Blake Seven, but several of my friends have been nice enough to buy the book and read it. But I have had a few sessions with friends where they're like, okay, I need some backstory here. So
Yeah.
I've had to fill in a few people on some things, but mostly they said for the most part they could follow it, even coming into it not knowing a thing about it.
I've passed it around the campfire a little bit, and there's some people that aren't the most, conversant with Blake Seven, and it's been great because it started a load of new conversations. They've been able to read it and follow it, and then they'll go, "Oh, you've got to tell me more about that. Who's that guy? There's this guy mentioned. Who's he? What was that all about?" And I'm of course loving this. Excellent. I can totally be Lord Commander Blake Seven nerds. It's been brilliant. So thank you for that gift. But
I've had a couple of my mates who've done that, and they said, "Okay, which episode should I watch?" And I've had to kind of handpick key episodes that are linked to our novel, and say you should watch this episode. You need to watch Aurak, for example. You need to watch Star Wars. You need to watch X, Y, and Z. You definitely need to watch Blake. You need to watch these episodes because they do feed into the novel, and they would be. If you're not going to watch all 52, these are kind of the ones that you need to take in.
Yeah. And one of the things you mentioned earlier, just for people that might not be aware when they listen to this, you mentioned earlier about parts. This is coming out in parts. Do you want to tell me a bit more about that? So how's the novel being chunked up?
So 3 parts. And literally when we went back and looked through the book, it kind of did tidily split into 3. Someone who mentioned it, can't remember, said the way that it was written was, you could kind of see that it was episodic in a way, and there were distinct things happening. So we have these quite 3 distinct parts that it was quite easy to split the novel into 3. So it'll be 3 parts in answer to your question.
3 parts. And looking at the process as a whole, what's been the hardest part about bringing all this together? What's been you've mentioned a couple of sticking points, but what's been the absolute monumental headache of it all?
Well, I mean, I'll have to, full disclosure, Chrisi and Neil have done the vast majority of the work. Neil's playing one of the major characters, a few other minor roles. Chrissy's narrating it, playing some characters, and having to do all the audio. So honestly, except for maybe making some decisions, I've had it really, really easy. I just get to sit back and have fun and listen to audio samples when Chrisi sends them. But I think the hardest part has been, you don't realize how many decisions about everything you have to make and try to come to agreement on. So I think that's it. It's just a lot more decisions that you have to do than I thought it would be for something that I'd already, written and it was done.
Yeah, I think
for me, sorry, Neil.
Go.
I was going to say, as a whole, it's the difficulties come around the magnitude of the undertaking. Really, it's just a very large story, and when you're making it, you don't have the luxury of just looking at each little episode as just being that's it. You've got to take into account all the other, and I've had to redo and re-extract many of the episodes in part 1 just to make them consistent in a way. And there are some of the episodes would tie to each other, and I've got to go back and say, what was that sound I used for such and such way back at the end of it? So I might have used the sound for something at the beginning that I need to use again at the end. I'm like, what the hell was that sound? I've got to go back and get it. So I'm reasonably meticulous on keeping all my sounds recorded. So it's not really a problem, but it kind of did my head in amongst everything else. And I've got planes going over. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear them.
No.
It's all good.
I mean, that must be a nightmare, frankly. I can't, writing a book, or you have to remember what you said a few pages back about something or other, and particularly in something like science fiction where you try your best to remain firstly in tune with the canon that we are expanding upon, but secondly also what you have added in the bit that you just wrote, and we tend to swing back to certain bits throughout the novel, so I can only guess that adding sound into that as well, and what did the door of that thing opening sound like, what did so and so's gun sound like, all that kind of stuff. Oh dear me.
Well, you know, I am, regardless of the outcome, I'm kind of used to it now. So I know some of these things need to be taken into account ahead of it. But I was going to sort of circle back to answer the question properly there, and I forgot. It's not, when I said the larger undertaking is feeds into this, because I make a lot of shorter stories, and I can focus on the one little story each time with that, and then when it's finished, it's finished. But this is 19-20 chapters in the first part, so that's 20 little mini stories, and while they might be a little longer or shorter than each other, each one of them is a complete story in a way. And sometimes things only occur to me when I go to address that particular chapter, as Neil and Lou would know, because I've gone, oh, hey, why don't we do this? And they're like, well, why didn't you think of that in the first place? Well, I didn't think of it. I don't know why it didn't occur. You know, I can't explain this stuff. But there's been a few things where I've had to go back to some of the actors and say, oh, could you do this? Could you do that? So they've been patient, thankfully. I can't explain it other than that.
Creative license has to be allowed.
Absolutely. And how has much as it added to that difficulty that you've got obviously a cast that are geographically spread across the globe, that are never going to be in a flash recording room all together? So, you know, I imagine they're going to have to imagine the interplay between each other a little bit and rely totally on the script, really, to get their points across. Has that been an issue, or has that all worked seamlessly, smoothly?
Well, it hasn't not been an issue, but sorry, Lou, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I mean, again, like I said, Chrisi and Neil have had the hardest part of it. Like, Neil is very good about, he kind of is the one who organizes things and rounds up people, very much like herding cats. I mean, all over the place. And then, of course, poor Chrisi has to be taking all these different parts and putting it together. But I will say, from the perspective of somebody who's mostly just had the role of listening to it, so I've heard, you know, the individual bits a lot of times, and then to hear it after Chrissy's put it together, and it's been amazing how well it works. Like, it does come across like these people are actually in the same space talking to each other. So, I mean, that's been very cool, seeing how all these different parts come together.
That's been the most awesome bit, is listening back, because you think, as you touched on there, is how's this going to work? How's it going to come together? How's it going to knit? Is it going to sound authentic, or is it going to sound like, you know, pauses and one guy's over there, another person's over there? They're going to sound like they're in different spaces. But it does sound, you know, they do sound like conversations. They do sound like they're in the same space. They do it, and it's been so amazing to hear all the different voices come together, and their takes on the lines, and how the characters would interact, and how they've kind of grabbed the characters themselves and played them as any actor would, I guess.
So that jumps nicely, Neil, into what you were saying about bits you've enjoyed in the process. What are the real standout bits for you that are either you absolutely loved doing it, or have just turned out 1,000 times better than you imagined? What's been the bits for each of you where you've gone, oh, that was just, I've listened back and it was epic? Or
I think that specifically in the audio, which obviously we've kind of heard, we haven't heard the final version, but it's very, very close. I I think there are some really awesome bits in it. I really love the last couple of chapters when we have got the crew, so to speak, starting to come together. So them interactions have just sounded so good, really, really good. But I really enjoyed some of the bits. I loved some of the kind of smaller characters and how much life they were given by the actors playing them. So, for example, Martin, who plays Villa, plays a character called Zidane. You'd never recognise him because he does this broad Scottish accent, and it's just fantastic. The audio starts itself with two of the smaller characters, Broadfoot and Zira, and they're just brought to life as well. And you've got Kingston, Zidane's kind of agent, comes to life as well. It's just amazing hearing. So the highlights for me have been numerous. I can't really pick one specific, but I'm gonna go with as an answer everything coming together at the end a bit, and then there's the bit at the end which sounds fantastic when they do finally all teleport up to the ship, and that's where it stops with the teleport noise. That's the end of part, and that's just an amazing ending to stop there. So you're just there going, well, okay, well, what now? Part 2.
Really? Oh wow, that's great. I love it that it ends on a kind of cliffhanger-ish moment. That's brilliant.
Yeah, and I think for me, same thing as Neil, just hearing especially the bits at the end where you start getting a lot of the characters together and interacting. And I think we all said, oh, that's the point where it really starts to feel like Blake 7. Nice. And that's a lot of fun. And just for me, hearing actually voiced all these characters that have been living in my head, talking and arguing. You don't always get to hear the voices in your head in real life. So
absolutely.
I'm just going to jump in again here and say there's another bit that was particularly awesome and stands out for me as well. And that is when you first start, it's around chapter 14 in the book, but when you first start, Tarrant and Villa first visit them on Gouda Prime, and they're revisiting the shooting, the gun shooting in Blake's base in GP, and Chrissy's actually picked out the actual sounds from the last episode, so you just back there straight away, and it just knits it all in so well for that section. And so that's an awesome bit as well. People who aren't familiar with Blake 7 might not hear might not resonate with that so much, but for us guys that are, you just listen to that bit and you go, wow, I'm taken back there, and this is them remembering it, and it just works so well. And that's all Chrissy's doing, and Chrissy had an idea in there about the way she was gonna do the way that was written, and that's one of them. But what we touched on earlier about the differences between the mediums of writing and audio, and Chrissy came up with an idea, and we kind of went, we're not sure about that, and it actually when it was there and it worked, it sounded fantastic. So
yeah, I mean, I know one of the things that was in my head when we were writing that section and having Tarrant especially remember it, and kind of, I wanted it to be like one of my favorite scenes ever in a movie is in Jaws, where Quint is remembering being on the Indianapolis and it's sinking and going in the water, and just the way it's mostly narrative where he's conveying, these hundreds of servicemen in the water getting picked off by sharks, and it's just kind of him talking, but it just like makes your blood run cold. So yeah, I was really happy because that, especially with the audio, really came across.
I've sort of done that a few times. What I wanted to do with a lot, I've done that situation where it's been mixed up with voices and sounds and narration a few times, where it was just narration in the book. I've done that deliberately, so it's not just me talking. I mean, if you don't like my voice, you're probably not going to like the audio. Spoilers. That's not a surprise, right? But if you're if you put aside that somebody's speaking, as long as that person has a reasonable voice, then you're going to listen to the audio and just go with it, aren't you? Because you'll get used to it. But you don't want the same person just droning on and on. It's not an audio book. It's a drama. So you have to split it up. And where I've kind of split that a few times and added, there's a bit of nostalgia in this first part, right? So I just hooked into that and said, well, let's make connections then to the series with those opportunities. And that one particularly, because Tarrant was kind of a bit of an unemotional character in the series, perhaps. Not all the time, but in some ways he was. And I think in the book, he's much more of an emotional guy because he's older, he's kind of jaded, he's almost considering, well, it'd be great if someone would just come and kill me. That'd be great just to stop suffering like this. It's just, that itself is quite deep, that statement. And so, to write that kind of thing into his dreams, to say he's having nightmares every night, just tells you a lot more about the character without having to say it. So that's really where that comes from.
And I think the next thing I'd ask them, following on from that, is what's the bit that you're really looking forward to people hearing? If you had to pick a bit where you go, I can't wait till people hear that bit, because I'm excited by that bit, right? I'll say quickly now, I've told the guys before on the previous podcast, I loved the Villa and Tarrant interplay in the book. I loved the older versions of them. Being older now myself, I feel, I can relate to it, and I can relate to what they've been through and where they are and stuff like that. So I can't wait now even more to hear this part. But what do you really want people to hear?
Well, I do. I mean, there's several. I have my own favorite parts, but the interplay between, I think the fact that Lou and Neil chose Tarrant and Villa to bring back, like if you have to choose two characters, I think that's genius, frankly, because, for me, it works really well, because that's a whole conversation in itself. But the fact that they brought those two characters back and not two others, not another two, just means that you have an opportunity to really delve into their relationship. And I think the writing really, really developed how they probably were 30 years on. That's probably how they spoke to each other. And Tarrant's probably kind of sick of Villa, and Villa's kind of drinking all the time. And, there is one section, I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but there's a lot of snoring going on. And every time I hear that chapter, it just cracks me up, frankly. But then snoring noises kind of crack me up anyway. But that chapter itself actually is the one that starts with the dream sequence, and it goes from really nostalgic and really tragic to being a bit comedic, and then they start talking to each other when they both wake up, and it's just, you just don't want it to really stop. I'm not talking about the quality of anything other than just investing in the story to say, I didn't really want it to stop. When I listen to it, I don't want that chapter to finish. So I want more of it. Like you did when you watched the series. So it's a bit like that for me.
And the descriptions of the smells in the toilet. I mean, it's even more kind of puts you off your food if you're listening to it than reading it. It's very potent.
I mean, I think that in answer to your question, I think that there isn't one specific bit I'm going to pull out and say I'd really want people to listen to that. I want it to be able to drag people in so they think I've got to listen to all of this. And then at the end go, do you know what? I've now got to listen to part 2. So I'm hoping, having listened to it, I'm hoping we achieve that. I mean, the part 1 is probably the most difficult part, I think, of the whole story. There's a lot of setup in it, and it has to go back and it has to lay down some pasts, and it has to go back to the original series. So I think there's a lot to take on. So there's quite a lot of lightening up to do of the actual book, I think. And I think I think listening to the audio, we've achieved that. And I've got to give credit to the actors for that. It's lightened what could at times be, in all honesty, a little bit of a heavy read at points at the beginning, just simply to set that scene and to bring everything together. But each chapter and each I think we've really got sections. There are chapters, but there's sections. There are, and each section brings something new and something rich, I think, and I think that's hopefully going to make people. I've listened to that, so I gotta go and listen to the next section now. And then sections are quite standalone, and they are quite different, and they do take you to different places with different people with different characters before it all starts to come together as one at the end. So I haven't really got a favorite one that I'm going to say I hope the people listen to. I just want the one thing that I'm going to say is, look, just stick with it. There's so much variety in it and richness in it that yeah, listen to the whole thing.
Brilliant.
I want to add something to that, actually, and that is to say just a small shout out to Alan Bell for the music, because we are using a set. I've never made any kind of audio compilation where someone's written the music specifically for it. I don't make music myself. So, but I love the music parts. It's very important. And so Alan wrote a piece, for based, on request to act as the theme tune. And he also gave us some of the background themes and thumps and bumps and whatever you call that in music terms. But then I went back to him and he was willing to work with me. I asked him for pieces that represented emotions. So I asked him for mood pieces. So there's a piece to represent the Outers and Space World. There's a piece for the Federation. There's a piece for Inga and Blake. There's pieces that draw you to a chapter that say, well, that's a chapter about Blake and Inga, because it's that piece of music. It's an associative thing. So I try and tie the whole thing together with the music pieces as well. And there's one particular piece that's my total favorite, and that's the Federation March, I call it. It's just, he just gave it to me, and I was just like, I love that piece of music.
Wow.
Good God, I love it.
Yeah.
So
like
and now I'm going to use that a lot in the upcoming sections, because we've got more Federation. I'm like, I want it. I want more of it. Sorry.
Massive shout out to Alan. Is a good shout, Chrissy, for doing that for us. It makes it unique, it makes this difference. You can grab music off a shelf or go and try and grab some of the stuff that was done in the show and kind of fudge it in there, but that wouldn't work. And when Alan originally started talking to me, I put a shout out saying, can someone do a theme tune for us? And when I started talking, and we were tossing ideas back and forth, and he was sending me stuff on through Messenger, and the amount of time he put into get it right, because I was being my usual fussy self and going, no, that's not quite right, that's not quite it, and he's just willing to go away and fiddle with it and change it, and came up with. I love the theme tune. It sounds like a bit like Blake 7, but it isn't the Blake 7 theme tune. There's elements of it in there, and then hearing the music throughout, it makes it. That's Vindictus. That's that's now the audio. The incidental music and the theme to Vindictus itself, and that's pretty awesome. I think.
That's cool.
Chrissy touched. I'm skipping back and forth, but and Chrissy mentioned it, the Inga and Blake bit you were on about a bit. That's another bit as well in a section that is quite different to the rest of the sections of the book, of the audio. Stop saying book, of the audio. In that it's quite emotional. And when I first heard that, I'm not afraid to admit, I had a little bit of a wow. That's kind of hit me a little bit. Do you know what I mean? It's just
absolutely.
lot of emotion, and then the actors did a great job again. There's a lot of emotions in this audio as well. If it's not, the relationship with Tarrant and Villa, the Inga and Blake scenes as well. There's a lot of emotion in there as well, which I think is good as well.
There's a lot of emotion in the book. I mean, when I think about trying to keep it spoiler free, characters who depart and old friends, facing that reality of their departure. You know, there's some really powerful bits in there where I think we talked about the previous podcast. I was doing a bit of a page. Sorry, whoa. I must have misread that. He didn't just did he? I can't wait to hear some of when you get to that part. I can't wait to hear some of that. That's going to be absolutely amazing. Part two.
What you're referring to there?
I'm gonna skip. Well, I'm gonna come back to the question I was going to ask next because I need to talk really quickly about schedule because we keep talking a lot about parts. How's this all going to pan out timeline wise? When's part 1 out? What's happening in part 2, part 3? Blah blah blah.
I mean, part 1 is scheduled to come out end of June-ish, so that's where we are for that. We're not going to put timelines on part 2, part 3. We're not going to do that here and now. We don't want to put that kind of pressure on anyone. We've got a load of the audio in already from the actors of part 2, so we're ahead of the game on part 2. I do know what's coming for part 3. We're gonna have to write them scripts again. I know that's gonna be at some point. But you know, I don't want to say any specific timelines of part 2. I don't want to put any pressure on anyone. You know, we've all got lives, we've all got jobs, we've all got families, we've all got things. So we're hopeful we can potentially get the thing out somewhere around all of it out by somewhere around the end of the year, but we'll wait and see.
Brilliant. And I mean, again, I've talked to you guys a lot. I've talked about Vindictus a lot on the old social media. So you know I'm a campaigner for a sequel. You cannot just leave me hanging like that. It isn't fair. But I'm going to assume there is a sequel potential bubbling around. But knowing that you've gone down the audio path with this one, are you going to prep the second one with audio in mind from the start? If in this hypothetical world there is a sequel, would you write it knowing it's going to be transitioned into an audio?
I think there's a number of things there, which is going to be we need an audio genius like Chrisi to say yes, I'll do that. B, we'd have to try and recapture or re-sign up, if you like, a number of the cast, because obviously they played the roles. We'd love to have that continuity. And C, someone needs to write the thing or the things, and we need to come up with a structure for what that would be and what that would look like. So there's a number of things there. It is, let's be bold, it is our intention in some way to continue the story. So, but how long that would take, when that would happen, what that looks like, and what medium that's going to be isn't certain in any way just yet. But we're kind of toying with the idea of not writing it all ourselves, Louella and I. So we're kind of toying with the idea of other people pitching bits in and it being a bit more episodic, not quite as long, shorter bits, and get some other writing. We might write bits of it, top and tail things, maybe, if you look at it as a season, if you want to look at that. So,
showrunners, I love it.
If you look at Vindictus in 3 parts, you could argue that's the first 3 episodes of a season. So what comes next?
Brilliant.
I've said too much and I'm not letting
No, you haven't. You've done a beautiful teasy job there. I backed you into a corner and you had to answer.
No, and as far as, thinking about what we do differently, writing it knowing it might possibly be in audio, I think one of the things we talked about was maybe making sure there's more dialogue in it, which is hard for me because I like writing narration much better. Between the two of us, Neil is by far the stronger dialogue writer. I got better at it, but you'd realize that in an audio, you do. If you have actors, you want to be using them as much as possible. You still need narration. And then also, I need to not try to make up such weird ass words.
We're not going to go back to Zedith. Like,
I love that as a takeaway. No more made-up words. No more controversial names that require a pronunciation guide. We're going to keep it.
Everyone's going to be called Jeff.
Yeah, or Tarrant. We're gonna follow Nation's example. Everybody's going to be called Tarrant with a D first name. But thank you so much, guys, for taking the time to talk to me today, to do all this. I can't wait for the audio. I know there's a legion of people out there that can't wait. Roll on into July. So thanks ever so much, guys, for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.